Hey guys, it's Dean. Did you know that Super Mario Bros. 2 was a reskin of Doki Doki Panic? There, I got that out of the way. Welcome to Mario vs. Sonic Episode 2, Super Mario Bros. 2 vs. Sonic the Hedgehog CD. It's not uncommon when discussing classic Mario to ignore Mario 2, and classic Sonic to ignore Sonic CD. But there are some who still very much consider them both integral parts of their classic eras of their respective series. And while that might be true, it'd be foolish to ignore that they are largely seen as a black sheep of the classic era. That doesn't mean they're the worst of the bunch. On the contrary, I find Mario 2 and Sonic CD to both be improvements on the inaugural games in the series, but they are different from their predecessor, and both of which are known to be different because of something related to the Western world. Honestly, I'm not here to cover the development in detail because it's been done to death. Mario 2 was a reskinned game to cater to the West since Lost Levels was too hard, and Sonic CD was developed simultaneously with Sonic 2, but with a different team in the US than the original team in Japan that worked on Sonic 2. For the sake of this video, that's all you really need to know, and that's why I'm putting these two classics head to head. Starting with Mario 2, it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what the general opinion of this game was on release. I mean, obviously it was a sequel to the most important video game of all time, so everyone picked it up, but I don't really know for certain how the general reception was because the release was all over the place. In the US it came out in 1988, but only about 14 months before Mario 3 released, and that was the game everyone was hyped for because it also came out in Japan in 1988, and was an actual sequel to the original game. Mario 2 clearly was popular though because in 1992 it was released in Japan as Super Mario USA, and I mean, that was after Super Mario World was already out. What I can say for certain is the game is currently looked back upon fondly and loved by many, even if it might not be everyone's favorite. There are many staples from the game that have stuck around for decades, but also elements that haven't so much been thought about since. Similar to Super Mario Bros. 1, there are three main versions of this title, the first being the original NES one, the second being the Super Mario All-Stars version on Super Nintendo, and the third being the sequel to Game Boy Color's Super Mario Bros. Deluxe that I briefly covered in the previous video. Luckily for everyone, however, by this time the Game Boy Advance had released, and Super Mario Bros. 2 was released with it as a launch title, titled Super Mario Advance. So instead of getting a screen-crunched NES port on the Game Boy Color like we did for Super Mario Bros. 1, we got a port of the far superior Mario All-Stars version from the Super Nintendo. And call me controversial, but I think the Game Boy Advance version is the definitive way to experience this game. So that's what I'm going to be playing today. It's so unfortunate that Super Mario Bros. Deluxe was released on the Game Boy Color, because an advanced version released with the aesthetic of the All-Stars version and the extra modes of Deluxe would have been the definitive version of Mario 1-2. But basically, I'm playing a ROM of a port of a remaster of a reskin of Doki Doki Panic, Super Mario Advance. Now, on to Sonic. The symmetry between these two titles is already starting to show, because I can't really pinpoint the popularity of this game on its original release as well. It came out for Sega's obscure CD add-on that approximately 4.5 people bought. This thing was so dumb. I mean, the technology behind it definitely wasn't, but it failed because it was an add-on rather than a whole new console. I'm not an expert on Sega's downfall by any means, but I have to imagine it started around this point. Console add-ons just don't work. I mean, the Wii U failed because people thought it was an add-on even though it wasn't. Regardless, Sonic CD was released with this add-on and was obviously the best-selling title on it, and very likely the main reason most people purchased it. And I mean, kudos to Sega because at the time Sonic was clearly a system seller. Of the 2.24 million buyers of the Sega CD, 1.5 million of them also purchased Sonic CD. And if that doesn't prove how popular classic Sonic was, then I don't know what would. Compared to the other games in the series, Sonic CD was largely seen as the mysterious title everyone wanted to play, but not many got to experience. For years it was talked about on the playgrounds. The cinematics behind it, the cutscenes, Amy, Metal Sonic. Only the lucky kids convinced their parents to get a Sega CD. Eventually it released on PC, and a few more people got their hands on it. Less people started talking about it though. And eventually that PC version was released as part of the Sonic Gems collection on GameCube and PlayStation 2. And well, by this point I think it was clear to everyone that the only reason Sonic CD was as popular as it was in the 90s was because it had a cool animated intro and because not enough people got to play it. By the time it came out in the Gems collection and became mainstream, the way people play classic Sonic had already been established, and Sonic CD suffered from being too different from Sonic's 2 and 3. And that was the case until the mobile remaster released in 2011. Along with many other quality of life improvements, it added the Sonic 2 and 3 spin dash, threw on some touchscreen controls, and single-handedly made classic Sonic relevant again. Sonic CD's mobile port was the first of the Christian Whitehead remasters, and if he had never released the proof of concept of his retro engine, we'd probably live in a world where Sonic Mania doesn't exist. And honestly, I don't know if Sonic's current 2022 popularity would exist either. I may be reaching a bit, but I genuinely believe Christian Whitehead might have played an immense role in saving Sonic. I know he did for me. Shoot, I totally forgot Sonic CD was even a game before his remaster came out. In fact, all those stories about Sonic CD being discussed in the playground, those are just my experiences. It was a game on an obscure add-on that I knew I'd never convince my parents to buy, and we almost never bought games on our PC back then. Heck, you could have told me Sonic 3D Blast was Sonic CD and I'd probably believe you. All I know is my first time playing Sonic CD was around 2016, after I had played and beaten Sonic 1 and 2 mobile ports. And I know for a fact that at the time I enjoyed the heck out of it, even though I could tell it was a little bit different. But I'll get to that. Mario 2, on the other hand, I have a bit more of a hands-on experience, but not with the NES. I don't even remember seeing the game on the NES, but I definitely remember sitting around and playing the All-Stars version with my family thinking the coolest thing in the world was the fact that Peach could fly. I think I was just a bit too young to beat the game. It's hard to remember the early years, but what I do remember is I never owned a Game Boy. My older brother did, and the only games we played were Pokemon Blue, Yellow, and Tetris, but it was mostly him playing. I never owned a Game Boy Color either, but around 9 or 10 years old, I was sure I could convince my dad to buy me one if I tried hard enough. So I asked, and I asked, and I asked, and then I figured I'd sit back and wait for my birthday or a holiday and hope for the best. And then one day my dad came home from work with a box that had a Game Boy Advance in it. And my first thought was, dang it, he bought the wrong thing. Shoot, I didn't know what a Game Boy Advance was. I thought it was one of those weird Chinese knockoff consoles with 2,000 games in one, but they're not really 2,000 games in one. I was 10 at the time, barely had access to internet, and didn't find out until I went to school the next day that my dad bought me the coolest thing on the market available. I went home, looked at the back of the box, saw all these screenshots from my Super Nintendo childhood games. F-Zero, Super Mario Bros. 2. I knew I had to have it. So apparently the story goes that my dad happened to randomly walk into Best Buy to pick something up and notice a line of dads with their sons. When he went to see what the deal was, it turned out it was the launch of a Game Boy Advance. God, I miss the old days. So he scooped one up for me because the salesman said it was better than the Game Boy Color and could play our old Game Boy games on it. And like, how bad of a salesman do you have to be to not be able to convince someone to buy Super Mario Advance along with the Game Boy Advance? Instead, I was stuck playing Pokemon Blue on my Game Boy Advance for months. Which, okay, in hindsight is one of my favorite games of all time, but I still had to get Super Mario Advance. So I gave it some time and started the process all over again, because I knew better than to go to my dad and just ask for a new game after he just bought me a new console. Eventually, he agreed to buy it for me tomorrow after work. The next day he came home late from work, so we couldn't get to the Best Buy in time. And I'm not even going to sugarcoat it, I cried. I still remember bawling my eyes out, and my dad looked at me, thinking, what the hell is wrong with this kid? Like I said, I miss the old days. The following day we bought the game, and man, I played the heck out of it. I 100% completed it more than once. It was my game, my Game Boy Advance. No sharing, no fighting for the TV, just me and Mario. Well, except I picked Peach because she flies. But yeah, so many fond memories of Super Mario Advance. Until I traded in for Super Mario Advance 2, but we'll get to that later. After not touching the game for about 15 years, I revisited it again in 2019, and I 100% completed it with relative ease. And finally, I played it again for this review, and I still love the heck out of it. And I don't care what any of you say, the characters' voices don't ruin the experience, and it's just something all these YouTubers and reviewers echo because they want the Super Nintendo to be the definitive edition. I'm a millennial. I'm born in 1990. I started with Super Nintendo at 3 or 4 years old, and I played it for almost a decade while owning Super Mario All-Stars. The Game Boy Advance versions of Mario All-Star games are better. The quality of life improvements in regards to save features alone make them better. But I'm going to stop myself because this isn't a remake comparison. This is Mario vs. Sonic. So let's move on. Sonic CD is gorgeous. There wasn't a single moment during the game where I felt like they held out. The only complaint I can see people make is that the colors might be a little too 90s-esque, and probably wouldn't sit too well with someone on an acid trip. But other than that, I think this is an all-around gorgeous game to play, and there are some moments where you can definitely see the benefits of the CD add-on. Mario 2, well, you're not really going to see much of an improvement from Mario 1 since the 16-bit versions were both released simultaneously on the Super Nintendo, but that's not really a bad thing. It still has the classic sprite work that so many people love to this day. It looks great for the Game Boy Advance, but admittedly Super Mario Bros. 3 and World look better, but it's hard to compete with those juggernauts anyway. My personal opinion is that Sonic CD looks much better than Mario 2, but I can see why others might have a different opinion. And I hold the same opinion with the music. These games are both not quite as iconic as their predecessors when it comes to music and sounds, but they still hold their own and have their fans for good reason. Sonic CD's soundtrack is bumping though. I really enjoyed it more than Mario 2's. And by that I mean Sonic CD's Japanese soundtrack, since that was the one that was set as default in the Android port, so that really is the only one I know. Not to recycle too much of what I said in my last video, but music and even the aesthetics to some extent aren't really what are going to decide which game I prefer in this series. I'm much more about level design and gameplay when it comes to how much I enjoy a game. Okay, here goes. Starting off with Mario 2, we find ourselves with a list of 20 levels, 6 worlds of 3, and World 7 containing the final 2 levels. The game is a lot different than Mario 1 though. It's no longer just a scroll to the right platformer. Instead, it has many moments where you might find yourself going up, down, and even back in some instances. You still need to get to the end of the level though. You just more or less have to journey through multiple doors and areas to find the end of the stage. Most stages end with a fight against Birdo, making its inaugural appearance in this game along with Shy Guy and Bob-omb and a few other staples of the franchise. And you complete the stage by walking into a hawk's mouth. Yeah, just go with it. I didn't really cover the story, but it's all Mario's dream apparently, so it's bizarre. At the end of every third stage, you face a boss battle that's slightly more difficult than Birdo. They're fairly repetitive and in some cases literally the exact same boss, but it's a drastic improvement over what we saw in Mario 1. My favorite boss is probably the giant Birdo boss. Reminds me of Metroid Fusion, strangely enough. Actually, this whole game is almost a Metroidvania. I know that sounds odd, but hear me out. It's hard to consider this title a platformer. You spend a lot more time having to do something rather than simply trying to platform your way to the end of the level. And if you're strictly trying to play this game to the end like a platformer, then it's not even that fun. I mean, sure, it's cool that each world now has a different theme this time around, so it fits the game's progression a lot more, but the reason Mario Advance is the superior version of Mario 2 all comes from one simple thing. The red coins. This game is significantly better if you look at it as a collectathon instead of a platformer. The red coin search is one of the best things about it, and the level design complements the search very well. In fact, my preferred way to play this game is to try to collect as many red coins as possible before completing the stage and coming back after beating the game to collect the rest of the coins. Now I know coin collectibles aren't exactly groundbreaking, they're in almost every 2D Mario title released since the year 2000, but the difference is those games actually make for good platformers, whereas Mario 2 thrives in being a collectathon. And it takes it a step further by adding hidden Yoshi eggs in each level to find after you get all the red coins. The issue though is that finding the Yoshi eggs aren't nearly as fun, and you'll probably need a guide to get all of them, but they're a decent addition to the whole experience. For those of you who don't know, Mario 2 works off of a health system instead of a typical mushroom and power-up system. In order to increase the number of hearts, you have to find these potions to create a door to an alternate dimension where you can hope to find a special mushroom to increase your heart count. The problem is that sometimes you have to go on a journey with the potion bottle to figure out where that mushroom is. It's not a huge deal because you can beat this game fine without getting the extra hearts in a lot of instances. The problem is during the Yoshi egg hunt, the same rules apply. You have to break the potion bottle in exactly the right location and hope that when you enter the door, the Yoshi egg is there. Otherwise, you just wasted the potion bottle and would have to exit the area and return if you want to try again, which isn't always possible. And what's worse is that sometimes when you enter the area, the egg doesn't even show up. So you exit through the door, and while you're leaving, you see it fall from the sky. I'm not sure what's totally necessary to make some of them fall from the sky though, when you already have to traverse the level in hopes of finding the right place to break the potion bottle in the first place. This is basically why I think you're probably going to need a guide to fully complete this game. If the Yoshi eggs were implemented in a better way, I'd praise them a lot more. But all in all, I think Mario Advance makes for a really good 2D collectathon more than anything else. And since the NES and the All-Star version don't have the red coins, they're just not as fun. That being said, and I don't know if this was a one-time thing, it does feel like the control on Mario and Luigi was a bit tighter in the All-Stars version. I initially started out thinking I wouldn't play as Peach this time, so I can get a different experience. But I quickly found myself going back to her because the brothers felt a bit too slippery, and Toad's lack of verticality hindered my experience with him. It eventually led me to switch over to the All-Stars version to see if the brothers controlled better there, and they did feel a bit tighter, but that could have just been me adjusting to the gameplay a bit. I'm not sure. Regardless, I have no issues playing with Peach. It's funny because if this game was released today, reviewers and everyone online would go on about how Peach is the easy mode and only noobs use her. I remember everyone back then just used to say that she was the best character because she would fly, and that was it. And I still think that's the case. As I said, this isn't really a game to test out your platforming skills, it's more of an adventure, and the slippery controls means it's much better to use Peach so you don't screw up the jump during your adventure. The last thing I wanted to comment on is the difficulty curve. While there's no specific moment where it feels like the game suddenly is trying to test you, there's a lot more challenges and hiccups that slow you down along the way as you progress. Mainly, there's these floating masks that chase you when you pick up a key. And while many people like to comment on the difficulty of the barrage of enemies on the slippery ice in World 4, I personally find it to be one of the most enjoyable challenges of the game. There are moments throughout the game you might have to repeat a few times, but it's all very much beatable. The bigger joy is in collecting the red coins, and to a much lesser extent the Yoshi eggs. If you haven't done so already, give this game a shot from a completionist lens. And it should probably come to no surprise that I think Sonic CD has a similar issue as Mario 2, especially to those of you that know this game. So basically, there are 3 ways to play Sonic CD's 7 zones. The first way is to simply move to the right and try to get to the end of the stage. This was how I experienced the game for the first time back in 2016. I didn't care about completing the whole past and future timeline stuff, nor did I care about collecting the gems. I just wanted to run through the game. Playing the game like this is why I didn't enjoy it as much as Sonic 1 through 3. While the stages are all gorgeous and have some good moments in them, a lot of them were either a bit too short or too frustrating to enjoy it in the same way I would the other Sonic titles. And it was quick. You could run through it in less than an hour probably if you're just trying to get to the end of the level as fast as you can. In Sonic 1, the game had you do a lot of platforming outside of Green Hill Zone, and the platforming wasn't even that enjoyable. But the stages were designed in a relatively linear fashion so you'd get to experience everything that was intended if you were just trying to run through the game. In Sonic 2, they took what they learned from Green Hill Zone and applied it through the game, allowing the player to run through the game as fast as they can. In Sonic CD, however, you'll see a lot more of the platforming that was experienced in Sonic 1. But the levels are much larger and have so many more routes that seem completely wasted since you can just blast through most of the stages fairly quickly. I personally don't think it's all that fun to play Sonic CD this way. If you're looking for a Sonic game to fly through as quick as you can, this shouldn't be it. The second way to play this game is to try and collect the 50 rings before the end of the stages so you can play a bonus round and try and collect the 7 emeralds. Or I guess in this game they're known as time stones. Collecting all the stones gives you the good ending of the game and is considered full completion. Playing the game like this is a bit more fun. You can go through the levels and look for the rings rather than trying to speed through it. But I wasn't a fan of this in Sonic 1 and I'm not really a fan of it here either. It's just too easy to lose all of your coins and have to start the collection all over again. And then if you reach the end of the stage and get hit, then it was all just a big waste of time. When I played this game for this review, I tried to complete the game this way, and it was more fun than just flying through it, but still, I wouldn't say it was all that good of an experience. That being said, the bonus stages in this game are way better than most bonus stages in all Sonic games to date, since they're a bit more forgiving. When I finished the game, I didn't have all of the time stones, but I had enough of an idea of the experience, and I was ready to start the video and tell you how Sonic CD isn't all that. But then I remembered that I haven't actually tried the third way to complete this game. Largely because most YouTubers don't recommend playing it the third way. You can skip the time stones and get the completion ending if you go full Muppet and play the game in the way designers initially intended. Each stage has past and future posts littered around them. The goal is to find one that says past, run through it, reach and maintain a fast speed which causes you to go back in time. And then here you have to find a single generator in the level and destroy it to create a good future. By destroying all the generators in the game, you can fully complete it. Each stage starts out in the present. A future signpost will move you forward to the bad future version of the same level. If you destroy a generator and then hit a future signpost, then you'll see the good future. So each level basically was designed with a past, a present, a good future, and a bad future. The problem though is going to the future is completely useless. And all I ever felt the future signposts do was get in the way and force me to keep myself from going too fast because I didn't want to time travel to the future. I wanted to go to, or stay in the past, and destroy a generator. You could technically beat the game without once going to the future. It's just there to show you that if you destroyed the generator and time traveled before going to the end of the level, you created a utopia. Which I guess is sweet, but feels totally unnecessary. Another issue is that when you pass by a signpost, it's not always that easy to find a place to pick up speed long enough to time travel. The stage does sometimes give you locations where you're guaranteed to pick up the speed if you need, but it's not uncommon to be frustrated because you find a signpost and then you hit a slowdown while trying to time travel, but you have to find a whole different signpost. However, I honestly find the challenge of that to be enjoyable in most cases. It was fun to try and look around to find a good location to pick up a lot of speed. Heck, it's even fun to treat the future signposts as an obstacle that slows you down so you work hard to avoid them. And then, when you finally make it to the past, the levels are so huge you're looking for a single generator to destroy. Which isn't all that fun, unless you play the game as Tails. For all of you that tried playing through Sonic CD and finding all the generators and gave up because the levels are huge, you need to try it again as Tails. His ability to fly completely changes my opinion of Sonic CD. And the nice thing is, to unlock him, all you have to do is run through the game as Sonic once. You don't need to collect any time stones or travel anywhere. Just spend an hour or so getting acquainted with the stages so that in your second run through with Tails, you can explore these vast and beautiful stages and look for signposts and generators and all that fun stuff. Have you ever decided that you were going to beat a game no matter what? That's what happened to me during this playthrough. I was adamant that I was going to get through the game and create the good future in every single stage. I was frustrated 2 or 3 times, to the point where I had to look up a guide, but other than that, it was incredibly fun. I didn't simply want to put Mario 2 against Sonic CD because they were the black sheep of their series. It's because in both games, if you just play through the game start to end without going for completion, then they're mediocre at best. But if you're adamant about fully completing these games and exploring all the corners of the levels to find where you're meant to find, then these games are so much more fun. And in both games, the experience is completely saved by not even using the main characters. The flying characters are everything in these games. While in Mario 2, Peach's float helps with the precision platforming needed to get through the game. In Sonic CD, Tails' flight allows you to actually enjoy the vast stages by giving you a chance to move vertically in ways that Sonic could only dream of. And add on to that the improvement of boss battles and the iconic head-to-head foot race with Metal Sonic, and you're in for a treat. As a side note, whoever decided to put the 1-up before the Metal Sonic race, bless you. The few times I've played this game, I found myself really having to test my skill to win the race, and it's always a joyous relief when I do. Having unlimited lives really helps speed up the experience. Another thing to note, I used to always think it was dumb that Sonic games take away the rings for the final boss fight. But when you play this game's final boss and you have access to rings, it kinda shows you why they do it. It's just too easy to defeat the bosses when you have unlimited hits available. But all that being said, I went back to this game not expecting to enjoy it nearly as much as I did. And I'm happy I decided to play through it with Tails, because I now have another classic game I'll be going back to regularly. Here's the tricky part. Mario Advance is a game I hold so much nostalgia for, and Sonic CD is a game I have no nostalgia for. In both this video and my last video, I had significantly more experience with Mario games. But luckily, next we have Mario 3 and Sonic 2, and I have more experience with Sonic 2, so I'm looking forward to putting those two head to head. You should consider liking, subscribing, visiting my Patreon, and all that fun stuff so you can be kept in the loop. I'm a little torn here because I really thought this win would go directly to Mario Advance, but now I almost feel like it should be a tie. But the issue with that is that I know I'm only going to give it a tie for nostalgia purposes. Also, I kinda hate ties. I'm gonna have to give this one to Sonic CD. Trust me, I'm just as surprised as you are. I think Mario 2 being a tad bit too slow in a lot of areas, the screen having to frequently shift every time you move across the area, the controls that feel like they could use a little work, all tend to set this game back ever so slightly in comparison to Sonic CD. Sonic CD really only stinks during Wacky Workbench. I didn't find any other moment in my playthrough with Tails to not be enjoyable. Whereas in Mario 2, even playing it now in 2022, I found some frustrating moments that, while I enjoy overcoming, at the end of the day were annoying experiences. Maybe it's the fact that I felt enlightened during the Sonic CD playthrough, maybe it's because Mario 2 is starting to get old for me, or maybe it's because I let Mario 1 ever so slightly edge Sonic 1 in my last video, so I feel like I should let Sonic CD slightly edge Mario 2 in this video. I'm not sure. What I can say though is I love playing both of these games and they're both staples of their series. Don't sleep on either of them. Play them to full completion, and don't let anyone tell you your opinion of them is wrong. These are extremely fun and timeless classics. And sure, I have to play them a certain way to find my enjoyment of them, but the joy that I find when I play this makes them that much more meaningful to me. I hope you agree, and if not, I'd love to see why you disagree with anything I said down in the comments. Until next time, thanks for watching. Dean, out.